Imagine for a second you're in your home, okay? You gotta go upstairs to the attic and dig some old stuff out of there. When you crack the seal to the attic, you walk in and it doesn't smell musty or dingy or old. It smells fresh and new and clean and clear. Now imagine that fresh smelling attic full of old things is a video game and you got yourself Octopath Traveler for the Nintendo Switch. That's a terrible analogy. Developed by Square Enix and Acquire and published by Nintendo, this heavily anticipated retro JRPG launched in July of 2018 and took the world by storm, receiving high critical praise and sales strong enough that physical copies might as well have been a thing of myth. But a retro aesthetic and good marketing wasn't the only thing that got people interested in this game. See, Octopath Traveler has a unique narrative format that's going to make talking about the stories and characters very unorthodox. I'm not joking either. I've looked at this script several times trying to find a way that I could maybe better talk about it, and I found my best option was to just script this part here, where I say I couldn't find a better way to talk about it. So, let's get into it. As the name implies, there are 8 paths to pursue in this game. Each path tells a different character's story, and each story is divided into 4 chapters. Which paths you follow and in what order is completely up to you. If you want, you could complete a character's story without getting any other party members along the way, as the stories do not affect each other at all. Though that would be incredibly difficult and very grindy. When you start a new game, you can choose who you want to start the game as, and this choice is more important than it lets on, as no matter how many other characters you pick up, you cannot remove the first person from your party until you complete their story in its entirety. Knowing how unique the game's format was, I decided to start with a character I thought was the most basic and easy to understand, so that I might ease myself into the gameplay smoothly. I started with Ulberich, the warrior. Each character has their own personality, battle capabilities, and storyline. They each hail from their own different parts of the world, and despite many areas of the world reusing assets found elsewhere, changes to the color palette, lighting effects, and weather make each area feel rather unique. On top of this, different sections of the world speak in different dialects, and while most are pretty tolerable, I gotta say I personally found Hanitz to have gone a bit overboard with its ye old Englisheth speakethin.
Hanitz, 'tis me, thou revered master. Missest me?
So how dost thou proposen to get in water from that merchant? I have but a short time to penne this mess. Seriously? Penne? Penne this message? This is so inconvenient! There's very little crossover between character storylines, so it's hard to sum up in a review what this game is about, as it's really about 8 different things. Most, but not all of the stories share a theme of self-discovery. The setup to the themes vary greatly from person to person, but with a few exceptions, they're all a little on the ordinary or even kind of generic side. That said, many of them do go to interesting places and explore interesting topics. Primrose and Alphen, while not my favorite characters to use, had the stories that resonated most with me. Primrose's story parallels a lot of the seedy underside of our own real society, and takes a relatively interesting and respectable look at situations not often touched on in video games. Alphen's story raises big questions about the responsibilities of those with the ability to help others and save lives, and who that ability should be extended to. Meanwhile, Ulberich just seems to be in a midlife crisis, seeking answers to questions that don't really need to be asked.
What am I fighting for?
We could go over the themes of all 8 characters, but we would be here a while. Every time you complete a character's chapter, you'll notice the recommended level for the next chapter is significantly higher than what your character is currently at. This is the game's way of pushing you towards collecting other party members and exploring their chapters as well. While you can tackle things in any order you want, I found just hitting everybody's chapter 1s in a row, and then hitting their chapter 2s, so on and so forth, was a good way to go about it. Of course, this means you may be putting upwards of 10 hours between doing a character's chapter 1 and their chapter 2. Thankfully, the game has this accounted for, and every time you start a new chapter, you will be given a refresher on the journey so far. As stated earlier, there isn't really any crossover in the stories, and aside from a weak attempt at tying them together in the post-game, they don't even properly converge. But the lack of interplay goes a bit deeper than this. With Octopath Traveler, you need to be in it for short stories and just accept that every story is going to feel like a lone adventure regardless of how many people you have in your party. Characters rarely talk among each other, and when they do, it's fairly shallow stuff and never more than 3 people at a time. Because of the non-linear nature of the game, and how you can get or avoid getting characters, making this a real team adventure with real team chemistry is a feat that's just unreasonable for a writing team to take on. Such a thing would require no less than 64 variations of every scripted conversation along the way. Getting used to the lack of an overarching story and inter-party conversation isn't easy, and it definitely ends up being the game's biggest downfall. Personally, I would love to see some more meat on these bones, and to see the Octad come together to pursue a real adventure, but that just doesn't exist. I do, however, find the short stories of lone adventurers and the way you can jump between them at your leisure more than worth it in the end. None of the stories in the game are big. In fact, from beginning to end, no single story has more than 10 hours of content to it. But this isn't really a negative thing. Instead, it's directly in line with the design of the rest of the game, and what makes it work so well in short or long gaming sessions. See, Octopath Traveler is a big game, but it's made out of nothing but small pieces. The world is sizable, but it's filled with tons of 20-minute dungeons, 10 structured towns, and 5 tree fields. Aside from a couple bosses, there shouldn't be anything in this game that will require more than a half hour of straight dedicated time. There's loads of side quests to uncover along the way, bonus dungeons filled with loot and optional job classes, and some areas of the map you can bypass altogether. Really exploring this world and the NPCs is one of my favorite parts of the experience. Different characters have different field actions that can change how you interact with NPCs, and some of this stuff is just pleasant. From the ability to steal from or barter with nearly anybody, to being able to challenge them to duels, or being able to find out more about who they are and what their often hilarious history is, it's just pleasant, not to mention beneficial. Despite nothing in the game taking a lot of time to complete on its own, there's a lot of time you can sink into this. Personally, my run took me 92 hours. I won't show anything from the post-game content as I feel people will refer to the suit of the optional jobs as spoilers. But my 92-hour playtime consisted of completing all 8 character stories, a handful of side quests, a few optional dungeons, all 8 secondary job shrines, all 4 optional job shrines, as well as what people call the true ending dungeon, which I highly recommend if you're going into it. Make sure every character is level 70 or higher and has great gear before you start. Just take my word on that. In every way, Octopath Traveler is the JRPG equivalent to a collection of short stories. Beyond explaining the narrative format and a few loose themes, there's not much else I can do for this section of the review. So let's move on to talking about something a little more easy to talk about and get into the combat. First off, battle happens in the traditional random encounter format. I know this doesn't work for everybody, and honestly it's not my favorite either. But the encounter rate usually isn't too high, especially considering how small dungeons are, so I was more than okay with it. Combat itself is turn-based and a great mix of retro and modern mechanics. You can bring 4 people into battle with you at a time, but party members can only be swapped out at the taverns in towns. Every character you have has their own job class that determines their battle skills, though some characters have battle skills not related to their job class that cannot be learned by other people. Skills such as Alphen's ability to create potions on the fly, or Honnet's ability to capture and summon monsters, Pokemon style. Job skills aren't all unlocked at once, however. They require JP to unlock, which you acquire along with XP by winning battles. As you get further into the game, you will find shrines in the overworld that will unlock secondary jobs for you, which massively expand your party building capabilities. The more battle skills you learn, the more support skills you unlock. Support skills are generally passive buffs, of which you can equip 4 of at a time per character. When battle starts, you have the normal list of commands: attack, skills, items, defend, and flee. This doesn't look like anything special on the surface, but there's a lot to look out for. For instance, Most characters can equip more than one weapon, and you'll be cycling through them regularly over the course of battle. Using the weapon with the highest physical or elemental attack isn't always the best choice, especially if the enemy isn't weak to that weapon type. So pay attention to these boxes beneath the enemies as you do combat. Upon meeting new enemies for the first time, these boxes will be blank, and your game of trial and error to find their weaknesses will begin. Once you have found their weaknesses, then you can begin taking down their defenses. The number inside the shield icon determines the amount of times you must target the enemy's weakness before they enter a vulnerable state. When you drop this to 0, the enemies will be stunned for a turn, so that you can deal damage to them directly, but once that turn is over, the number replenishes completely and the cycle starts over. Some enemies will have incredibly high defense that could take several rounds of single attacks to tear down. Luckily, the game has a system in place to circumvent that kind of tedium. Every time the turn order restarts, characters are granted one extra boost point, as seen by these gold orbs up here. BP adds a lot to combat. When just doing standard attacks, if you add BP to them, you attack several times in a row. When using BP on skills, you increase the potential of the skill you're using. The more BP you invest into the casting of a skill, the stronger that skill is. Some moves, such as divine skills, cannot be cast unless you put the maximum amount of BP into them. These are among the strongest moves in the game, and are definitely worth saving up for. Honestly, aside from balancing your HP and MP, this is about all there really is to battle. But when I say it's fun, believe me, I mean it. What really makes this fun for me is what you can pull off with the job system. To say that this game is well balanced would be a little bit generous. It certainly feels well balanced and tough at the start, but the further in you get and the more skills you unlock, the more you can unbalance the game. But I really don't think of this as a bad thing. There were points in the story where I hit what I thought were massive grind walls, like at the start of Chapter 3. But as I look back on those times now, I realize that had I known then what I do now about the mechanics, had I just paid a little more attention, I wouldn't have felt the need to grind at all. I feel not paying enough attention is a trap too many of us fall into when playing JRPGs, so instead of learning and improving, we grind. See, if you play your cards right, learn the right skills, and equip the right gear, you can easily become a massively overpowered force to be reckoned with. Take Therion for example, the Thief. His divine skill is a dagger attack that hits all enemies. The damage the attack deals is relative to his speed stat, a fact that a lot of people overlook. Equip nothing but gear that raises your speed stat. This way, 3 turns into every battle, you'll have enough BP to cast his divine art, and when you do, you'll likely be hitting the 9,999 damage cap on every enemy. Simple ways to maximize the output of the game's mechanics like this exist all over the place. One in particular I won't show because it involves an optional job class, but it works something like this. Using the Rune Lord ability Transfer Rune, you can cause status augments that normally target one person to target your entire team instead. Use Transfer Rune in addition to the merchant skill Sidestep, which grants 100% chance to dodge any physical attack, and your whole team becomes impossible to hit for a lot of the game's bosses. As OP as I felt throughout most of Chapter 3 and all of Chapter 4 and a lot of the post-game content, nothing quite had me prepared for the final post-game dungeon. Cheap tricks can't win everything for you, so maximize the output of the game's mechanics as best as you can and strategize your attacks well. The game will definitely require strategy, especially in the early to mid game and very, very late game. I personally liked this absolutely loose approach to balancing. Some people may find it cheapens the experience, but for me it made it feel just a little more personal. And honestly, I put work into building my team this way, and I appreciate that the game rewarded me by actually allowing me to accomplish the goals I envisioned. Now I liked the combat system quite a great deal, but don't mistake this for gushing. How I feel about the graphics is gushing. You've seen it throughout this whole video so far, but these graphics. I've long confessed my love for 2D sprites, and my god, some of them in this game, especially large monster bosses, are some of the best I've ever seen. There's not a whole lot of animation behind them, but damn is it a thing of beauty. The use of lighting in this game, the depth of field, the environment effects, everything just combines to make this an absolutely striking visual experience. It's easy to point to some technical things and complain on the merits of technicality like the game being locked in 720p, but I mean, sure, it's only 720p, but it really doesn't need to be higher. This 720p is far more visually appealing than many games graced by higher resolutions. The only real complaint I have visually is that in battles there's actual camera rotations, and these camera rotations mixed with the scaling and perspective changes on 2D sprites causes some visual artifacts that look a lot like tearing, but it's nothing too crazy. Everywhere else in the game the camera is locked, and these fixed camera angles to some people may feel cramping, but they're used well, often obscuring and hiding pathways to bonus loot and secret dungeons. Really, I've kind of burned through my only complaints about this game already. The lack of overlap between stories and character interactions, and the perceived grind walls. I got nothing but nice things to say about what remains. The sound?
I'm ready. Are you? Time to steal the show.
Excellent. Voiceovers?
Indeed, our fair city-state is among the longest standing on the continent of Austera.
The game offers dual audio and both performance tracks are great. There isn't a heavy amount of voiceover work, but there's enough. The soundtrack? I don't think there's a bad tune on it. You've been hearing the music from this game in the background through the run of this whole review so far. Controls? Intuitive and responsive. I'm so glad they allowed the D-pad for movement, it just feels right in a game like this. Performance? There's ever so slight frame pacing issues from time to time, but nothing worth even noting, honestly. For the most part, it's buttery smooth. I did see an interface glitch once or twice, but it seems pretty darn uncommon. I guess I maybe have one other complaint. Square ignored a massive opportunity and in doing so failed to hit this game's full potential. You guys know what I'm talking about. Octopath Travelers. Make it happen, Square. Anyway, that's Octopath Traveler, guys. A beautiful take on new meets old. And though the story and character interactions do leave a bit to be desired, it was a thoroughly fun game that offers a lot of challenges along the way, as well as the freedom to build yourself up to crushing nearly any challenge that lie before you, if you desire. And that's all I'm going to say on Octopath Traveler. If you guys enjoyed this video, you found it useful or helpful at all, leave a like, comment, subscribe, links to socials are in the description, share the video if you can, folks. As always, thanks for watching. This is so inconvenient! Congratulations on making it to the end of the video, everybody. This list of names you see scrolling in front of you are the fantastic folks who made this video possible by supporting the show on Patreon. If you'd like to see your name here and help control this content going forward, consider supporting the show on Patreon for as little as $1 a month.